like-minded professionals. We share knowledge, create opportunities, and build something great together. We've been established already a while ago in 2019 in Helsinki. We have tech communities and channels, and we organize lots of career-based events. We are an employer of record service provider, so we can support your journey working remotely from Finland with less hassle and more clarity. And we're really hands-on with the residence permit extensions and relocations. That is our major differentiator here. And a couple of words about today's agenda. So now we are having an intro from Nerds Bay. Then we prepared a small questionnaire to audience. So let's make it a bit interactive. And then there will be a great presentation that is prepared by Josefina and Igor. And then we'll dive into the interactive Q&A session altogether. A couple of words about myself. I live for more than 14 years in Finland. I initially relocated here to study. Then I stayed for work, then stayed for more work, then established my first startup, then again worked, and then got my citizenship, and since then living here with my family. I'm also a relocation and employer of record expert, so if you'll have any questions regarding visas, regarding remote work, just contact me on LinkedIn and ask them directly. I'll be happy to help. I have 2 degrees in business and in design, and currently I'm serving as a chief of operations at Nerds Bay. But without further ado, and without further introducing more and more things or people, let's get to know each other better. So here you can join our Slido. Just scan this QR code. Just basically, I'll try to do it as you do it as well. So let's make it a bit interactive as said, and let's see from where our audience and what experience our audience also have. So let's give it a minute. And let's go. So here, just enter where you live in Finland. Enter as a name like Espoo, Helsinki. I'll also type here Espoo. So yeah, great. We have people, and basically Otaniemi is outside of Espoo. Cool. I didn't know that it's now a separate region, but nice to know. And yeah, so Helsinki, Kampi, Seinäjoki. We have plenty people from Espoo, Tampere, Helsinki, and Oulu. There are also people from Jyväskylä joining. Perfect. And for your information, Kalasatama and Kampi are not anymore part of Helsinki. So nice. Yes, thank you. So let's move to the next question. How long have you been living in Finland? Just basically here, a couple of options: less than 1 year, more than 4 years, less than 4 years. And I guess the majority of audience is going to be just less than 4 years. 69%. So this topic is really important for you guys. More than 4 years, 18%, less than 1 year, 12%. Oh my God, we have so many people joining us today. Great, perfect. Yes, so finally we have about 70% of people living less than 4 years, more than 4 years, we have 20%, and less than a year, 11% of our audience. And let's move on to the last question. On which grounds are you currently living in Finland? Are you studying, working, living as a spouse, to have permanent residency, you have citizenship, or are you asylum seeker? Or if there are some other grounds, feel free to put it here as well. And the majority of our audience is here with the work-based permits. Then on a second place, we have study-based permits. Then on the third place, spouse permits. And there are some other grounds: permanent residency, citizenship, and then asylum seekers. Perfect. Yes. So that's really great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, to join our poll and learning more about you as an audience. And now we can give a word to Josefina and Igor to introduce themselves and present their beautiful presentation, what they prepared based on your questions. So Josefina, Igor, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, I'll stop presenting, and then Josefina, you can present your screen.
Yes, just a minute. I will share my screen for you guys. Here we go.
Perfect. Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Ilya, for hosting this session and having us here talking to you about a permanent residence permit in Finland. So welcome everyone from my behalf too. Our topic today is the permanent residence permit, and my aim is to make it as clear and predictable for you as possible, especially now when the new rules have changed and we have a lot of different regulations related to the topic. So we will walk through this for the eligibility, how is it assessed, and how applicants can plan their residence permit strategy. My name is Josefina Sipilä, and I have been working as a lawyer at Rödl attorneys in Finland for almost 5 years now. I also work closely with global mobility especially, so such cases as employees' relocation to Finland, or employees arriving to work in Finland, remote agreements, you name it. And I advise widely on related matters such as international taxation and immigration law. But that's short about me. I have also invited my experienced colleague Igor with me today as an immigration law specialist. So Igor, would you say a few words about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Well, when it comes to my side, to be frank, I graduated in the law school in 1981, as you can imagine. In fact, I was born in Tallinn, Estonia, and emigrated to Finland in 1989. So I've been living here for how many? 36 years already. My career as a lawyer started very interesting session. I mean, I used to work as the criminal investigator to the prosecutor's office first, and then the in-house counsel, and then the head legal, and then I moved over to Helsinki and worked with the big or huge law firms for quite a number of years. And before joining Rödl, I used to work for 14 years with Eversheds Sutherland, the international global company. And I'm with Rödl nowadays, how many? 4.5, almost 5 years. And I was specializing mostly on the M&A, corporate transactions, international commercial law, business strategies. And as a former foreigner myself, been involved of all this stuff related to the immigration law for over 30 years, my legal career in Finland. Been recognized for some magazines and nomination as the Immigration Lawyer of the Year in Finland in a row.
Thank you so much, Igor.
Oh my God. I've been born 36 years ago. you immigrated to Finland 36 years ago. So
Yeah, well, time flies. I haven't noticed it myself, to be frank.
Okay, before we jump into our topic today, I would like to say a few words about our law firm too. So who we are and why we work with these questions. So Rödl is originally from Germany, and we are a very international company with over 117 offices in 50 countries worldwide. So you can find our local office in almost every country and also your home country. We have 6,000 employees, and we are kind of one-stop shops, which means that we have 5 different service lines worldwide, in addition to our legal services, such as tax consulting or advisory and IT services. So yeah, we are mainly focused on companies, but also individuals. And we have been present in Nordic Baltic region for over 30 years now. In Finland, we are located in Kalevankatu, pretty central Helsinki, next to Stockman, if you know Stockman. At Rödl, we have core practice areas such as corporate law, employment law, immigration law, especially relevant for you. We go through, for example, employment contracts, answer employment and immigration related questions, for example, whether you qualify for a certain type of residence permit, and advice with application process and complaining of Migris decisions and other complex residence permit cases. So whenever you have like this kind of situations where you need to apply for a new permit or you have to switch from different grounds to another, that's the case where we can help too. So let's dive into what we're talking about today. So we will mainly focus on the new requirements by law for obtaining a permanent residence permit, because the rules changed in the beginning of 2026. So we will go through different pathways for applying for permanent residence, such as annual income threshold, education, language requirements, and we will cover the questions around them. You have had a lot of questions, so such as how the residence periods are calculated, how absences are treated, and we will also talk about other permanent residence conditions, and finally the special cases for family members and children. We try to leave you as much room as possible for questions, so that you will get the most benefit out of it. So what changed and who can apply for a permanent residence permit? So usually the case is that you as a non-EU or EEA national already reside in Finland, like we had the poll. You are already here, either through a continuous A permit or other legitimate grounds, after which you will apply for permanent residence if you want to stay in Finland permanently and for a longer time. Typical groups in practice include people whose A permit is based on family ties or employment in Finland, international protection, or another A permit basis, which we will cover then later in this presentation too. So permanent residence permit is applied for the purpose to secure an indefinite right to reside in Finland and stability. So you don't need to have fixed term renewals anymore if you reside permanently. The strategy itself depends on individual circumstances and your actual history and future plans in Finland. There are so many different forms of residence permits, so it might be possible to obtain a residence permit more easily based on, for example, self-employment or family ties than permanent residence, so the residence period in Finland. It's also notable that the permanent residence application must be submitted in Finland. So it is granted if the applicant is outside Finland at the time of decision making. It can be, but you have to submit it in Finland. So what changed and when? The new Aliens Act came into effect on 8th of January this year. This means that if you have filed an application or submitted it before 8th of January and it's still pending, these new rules doesn't affect you. But after that, you have to follow new pathways. So the purpose of the changes was to tighten the conditions for permanent residence permits. One of the purposes was especially to enable integration to the Finnish society even better. And therefore, for example, the language learning and work history in Finland is considered positive indicators for guaranteeing the permanent residence permit. So instead of previously having to meet all the criteria for permanent residence permit, you have alternative application paths. So the integration requirements vary depending on the path you choose. There are 5 different paths and only one of them can be chosen and related requirements have to be met. We will cover these 5 paths now more in detail.
Regarding the questions, I think that we can take the questions. If you don't mind, we can just take the questions as they pop up. So we have a question from Anton. Anton, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Yes, I'm sorry. Just the question out to the curiosity, because you told that there are now several paths. So, and you make it sound like the requirements for some cases got easier or got like lighter than it used to be. So, could you name any path where for which it's easier to get permanent residence now compared to what it was before the new rules? Because you like the government, you make it sound really positive, but I'm really curious if there is any case of like this.
Yes. So, for example, the education part, there was this higher education requirement in Finland. We can go to the previous slide. So this path 3, there it might be possible to get the permanent residence permit more easily if you have reside 4 years, for example, in Finland. So we will have 4 years requirement in these different application paths. And also the annual income threshold doesn't require language skills. So some parts of these are more easily, depending, of course, your situation.
I think you didn't get my questions. Of course, some of these paths are easier compared to each other. But I asked if these paths are easier compared to what it was, because it was 4 years and no income and no language for everyone. So, I mean, we may not proceed with this discussion, but you make it sound like it was an improvement, while I fail to see how it is an improvement.
I could drop my word. The easiest way would be, in fact, just to get a job while you're having a job, stay for 4 years, or get the requirement with the language skills, plus or either there are alternatives, either annual income for 40,000 euros brutto salary. So one could choose, because if it applies to the other different alternatives, before this year, it was much easier to obtain residence permit. However, we turn back to the case studies with several difficult cases we have had, and we are still having in respect with the permanent residence permit applications.
Okay, yeah. So I think that we can then wait until the end of the presentation, as Josefina has prepared quite thorough presentation, and we can continue to the Q&A after the presentation ends. That would be the easier way to go forward.
Yes, let's do that, because you will get answers from our presentation kind of a lot. So let's see if it works still. Okay, so let's start with the residence periods and eligibility. So first practical question is, how long do I need to have lived in Finland, and how is that period calculated? So the first pathway is residence in Finland, which is the main road usually for applying for permanent residence permit. This approach requires that you have lived in Finland for at least 6 years instead of the previous 4 years threshold. So the residence needs to be continuous and lawful. By lawful, I mean that you have had continuous residence permit, A permit, for example, or a Brexit permit before. And the residence is treated continuous if the person has spent at least half of the permit's validity period in Finland. So traveling occasionally to another countries, if you have business travels, you are staying shortly in another countries, or certain posted worker situations by your employer, do not break the continuity. You can still get the residence permit and the 6 years residence is calculated together even though you will have some short stays abroad. There are also other requirements tied to this application path. So additionally, you must have at least 2 years of work history in Finland, and your Finnish or Swedish language skills shall be at satisfactory level. This satisfactory means usually level B1. So it's in the European Common Frame. This is the language requirement there. However, the old 4 years requirement didn't disappear completely. So fast track is still possible after 4 years residence. In these cases, you may choose another application path than this main road or application path 1. There are some other exceptions and reliefs for the 6 years residence pathway. If you belong to a special group, for example, you're over 65 years old, you don't have to fill the language requirements. And also some certain life situations, such as disabilities or health issues, can be accepted, and MICRI doesn't necessarily require language and work history there. A child can also have easier access to permanent residence permit through guardian's status, and this we will also cover later. I wanted to also point out another option for permanent residence permit. This is EU long-term residence permit. It's a separate concept, so it's not an application path itself, but there is a 5 years requirement compared to the 6 years main road. So if you have resided lawfully 5 years in Finland or in EU member state in some cases, you have secured livelihood and good language skills, B2 level, you may obtain this EU long-term residence permit. It's especially for those of you who have EU blue card, for example, and if you have realistic plan to move later to another EU member state, or you want to ensure mobility within the EU, this would be an option for you. And in Finland, this PEU permit, so to say, is valid until further notice. So it's not fixed term fixed term residence permit. So before we go through the other pathways, I wanted to address one general integration requirement, which is applicable in almost all of the application paths. This is work history. So work history includes mainly employment relationship and entrepreneurships. And it's time-based. So when you have the relevant work history period that the MICRI estimates, you may have relied on unemployment benefits or social assistance no more than a total of 3 months. So MICRI looks how long have you received unemployment benefits or social assistance in calendar time, and then assess if the 3 months threshold for absences is exceeded. Some benefits are not taken into consideration, such as housing benefit or child support or disability benefits. And additionally, MICRI also counts the time when you were otherwise away from work. This means the period without work can even count even if no benefits were paid. So these absences are counted together when evaluating the 3 months threshold. So also small breaks from the work can be added together to this requirement. And the review period, for example, if you have the requirement of 2 or 3 years work history in Finland, it always precedes the application. So previous absence cases are if they are no longer in the period 2 or 3 years before submitting the application, they will not be considered anymore. So only before the application. However, certain temporary absences during an ongoing employment relationship can still be counted as work history, not as absence, if you return to work after this. So these include, for example, annual leave or pregnancy or parental leave, but not typically childcare leave, and temporary sick leave. So these are the parts where you might have the possibility to be counted as work history. If you have another, yeah.
Just to clarify, is it 2 or 3 years? So when we're talking about 3 months threshold, are these 3 months within the kind of last 2 years of your work experience, or is it kind of a longer period of time that Migri monitors that you're not getting any unemployment benefits?
So the monitoring time is right before your application submission. So the 2 years are calculated from the point where you submit the application and then backwards 2 or 3 years. And these 2 or 3 years are depending on the application path you choose. So in some application paths, the requirement is higher, and in some of them it's lower. So this we will still go through later.
Okay, so basically if I apply today, then Migri would evaluate from April 15th, 2026 to April 15, 2024. And if I have more than 3 months, then I'm not eligible to apply.
Yes, yes. And you should also consider that when you apply for the permanent residence permit, you stay in working life. So at that time of submission, you have to be employed. So if you have absence right before you submit the application, you should consider that you start the employment relationship when you submit the application.
However, let me add to this. However, while looking through the application, through the process of application by Migri, they most probably would require some additional information, which is to be updated. It is not necessary, so you can't be 100% sure or positive that at the day of applying, you have everything in normal, but then there are certain preconditions where the authorities would like to get certain confirmation on your income, being aware that you are still working. And we have had so many cases with this, taking into consideration that the process of this decision-making takes quite a long time. And that might be the problem, because at the day of applying, you could be working, and then within half a year time, you're not. Then one has to prove that there is certain potential of finding a job or whatsoever it could happen.
Yeah, and here we are in a bit of kind of vague area, because I have applied, and let's say next day I received a notice that I will be laid off. So what happens then?
And moreover, according to the new rules, the employer is obliged to inform the authorities, including immigration service, If something wrong happens or it goes another way we are expecting it to be, and the person is fired, for example, lost a job, the obligation of the employer is to inform the authorities, even after the process of submitting application has been fulfilled.
Right. Yes. And then another question is, if I have been laid off in the past, but I've been able to get a job, but it took me not 3 months, but let's say 4 months, but I had enough savings, so I haven't applied for the unemployment benefits. Does this also count or not?
Well, in general, it should be counted. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, but you should be aware of that if you have another type of unpaid period not covered by these 3 categories, it may be treated as absence from work. So Migri will evaluate case by case if the absence is qualified under as work history or under the 3 months threshold.
Right. And what do they typically, let's just quickly wrap it up and move on to the next point. But what do they typically kind of check when they analyze the case? Do you know? So is it like my search of work that they evaluate during this period that I'm unemployed,
Yes.
but not applied for unemployment benefits or social assistance? Or what is considered as a work history?
So,
working
for
life.
example, if you are self-employed or are building a company or starting a business in Finland, the time you spend on building a business would be considered as work history, even though it wouldn't be like employment relationship to any company. So that kind of situations where you have engaged some networking activities or work related activities that would be considered.
So in this case,
for example, that's just one example.
Yeah. So in this case, if I'm working, let's say, remotely to some company, or working, in Finland for some company, working remotely through an EOR or working on site, and I have been laid off, then the safest option for me to become self-employed and start, for example, freelancing. So this can be an option, right?
Yeah, this can be an option, and it should be stated to Migri that you have been active in the work market.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's good and covered, so we can move on.
Okay. So we had the covering the yes. So let's go forward. So now we go through the other application paths, which are so-called fast tracks, compared to the 6 years main road. So they usually require only 4 years residence in Finland. For example, in this annual income application path, you can qualify faster if you have strong annual earnings. So you must have at least 40,000 euros in annual taxable income in the most recently completed taxation before the application becomes pending. This means usually like single and completed tax year, and the income amount is dependent on your taxation according to income register, not, for example, your employment contract. If your taxation hasn't yet been completed when you are applying for permanent residence permit, the Migri will assess your previous completed tax year. So it's always taxation related, and Migri will see all the details from the income register regarding your annual income. Also, capital income can be counted towards the threshold, such as income received from rental activities, dividends, and interests. And pensions can also count, but other benefit type payments are excluded from counting towards the 40,000 threshold. Unlike the work history requirement, this application path does not require continuous employment or uninterrupted monthly earnings, as long as your annual total meets the criteria in the relevant tax year. So this is notable difference to the other pathway. Next, Igor will tell you a little bit more about the third and fourth application path. So the stage is yours.
You know, for some reasons, I have a technical problem with the camera, but you have enjoyed my face already. I can switch it on. I don't know what is the problem.
No worries. I think that we can proceed as now, as we can hear you loud and clear, and our all attention is on the presentation and on the slides. So
all right.
No worries about this.
So everything that applies to the education, we firstly have to understand that, well, education or studying in Finland itself does not give you any possibilities for applying for the permanent residence permit so far, because it's totally different status. While getting the higher education, say at the university or PhD, you still need to have fulfill certain preconditions of living in Finland on the grounds with so-called A status. And in practice, we are not turning to the book of law, but in practice it means that in order to apply for the permanent residence permit, you still have to perform your within 4 to 6 years, depending on the income, certainly. And definitely one has to remember that there are certain gradations or for the language requirements as well. My practical advice would be, as the Finnish language itself is very difficult to learn and study, for some of the people who speak English or German or both, I would recommend to study Swedish and pass the English test easily within, say, half a year. And my experience with my children shows that, well, all of my children were born in Finland, and 2 of them were to the Swedish-speaking daycare, and they started to speak Swedish within half a year time. It was 4 months time. And with the Finnish language, it took them about 1.5 to 2 years. So feel the difference. That is a requirement for the language. And while most of the foreign guys coming to Finland are studying mostly in English, the requirement for language would be definitely much heavier for them. And the role of education itself doesn't give the right to apply for so-called permanent residence permit. To my mind, to be frank, I see no practical difference between long-term, in certain ways, long-term residence permit and permanent residence permit, except that, well, one should, in any case, one should present in Finland for a certain period of time. You can't leave the country for a longer time, except with a certain exceptions. I mean, getting the permit from the immigration service, say Migri. If you need to go somewhere, you have to inform them beforehand and get the permission, which also could be kind of a choice in this respect. But the fast track, still you have to work. And basically, we still do understand that the education itself doesn't give any preferences while trying to obtain the permanent residence permit. And that is one has to understand, because some of the people are trying to, they're coming to Finland and they apply for, they study in English, but that is not, unfortunately, enough to continue with the permanent. Sometimes it happens actually when people are getting the so-called fixed residence permit and they apply earlier for the citizenship than the permanent residence. And that could also be a choice while fulfilling all the preconditions which are needed to apply for the citizenship as well. So even though the time period started to be much longer, but it applies, I mean, with the 6 years time with the certain exceptions, 8 years with longer, but still with 6 years exception. But especially it applies for the as well to the guys who are coming. Well, it is not related to the education somehow. When people are getting the residence, the first residence permit on the basis of startups, for example.
Yeah, here I have basically a couple of clarification questions. For example, which which degrees are qualified? So from which higher educational degrees are qualifying for the permanent residence permit? And regarding the developing language competence, I guess this is like A2 type of language, so 15 credits, is it correct? And then another question is whether when you're applying, you need to kind of not only show the education, but also show that you're staying in the country, like looking for work or working already. So what about these three things?
Yeah, looking for work is not, unfortunately, enough. You know it by sure. So you have to work.
Okay.
Because that is clear stuff. You have to work. The education itself is not. And we're talking about the higher education, definitely. This is master degree or PhD.
Okay.
Yes. And also the Finnish bachelor from the university, bachelor degree is qualified there.
Definitely, yes.
And what about the universities of applied sciences? If you receive a bachelor degree from the University of Applied Sciences, do they qualify as well?
Yes, they do. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
if there are Finnish education, yes. And regarding the language, the developing or basic language competence, you're correct. So this means A2 level or 15 credits language studies at the Finnish higher education institution. And yeah, namely language studies.
Right.
And for the grounds, so you must still meet requirements for the continuous A permit on basis of other certain student-based grounds. So you must have employment ground or family ties or financial grounds. So commonly a student needs to transition to residence status to an A permit basis from the studying status.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
This is D status, so-called, and it gives no alternative.
Okay. Yes. So we have lots of questions regarding the education path. So we'll keep it until the end of the presentation, and we'll get back to this later. So you may now put your hands down, and I'll just mark myself here that we'll resume this conversation after this presentation is over, because we don't have the entire day for the presentation. Unfortunately, 1 hour and a half.
And what comes to the foreign higher education degree as a ground, you need to meet the language requirements. So here you have to have work history and at least 4 years lawful residence in Finland. So this is good to be considered if you don't have the language skills of Finnish or Swedish, but you have foreign higher education degree as a ground. The recognition has to be, so the degree has to be recognized by certain Finnish educational authorities. And the degree must be eligibility for certain higher level roles or further studies in Finland. So typically these are master degrees or postgraduate degrees.
And moreover, it should be basically verified by the Ministry of Education, and that has changed. Those changes has been for quite a number of years already, because that is like, I could share my experience at the time when I came to Finland. The first thing I did, I ran to the Ministry of Education to get my diploma verified, and they said, do you need it in fact? Because you have the first class diploma plus LLM in States, and that was it. In case you wouldn't need it working at the official. So basically my diploma was never verified. And still I've been working all these years as a lawyer in Finland.
Right.
And with the language skill, that is also very tricky, because in EU is nearly adopted, the law is nearly adopted, and there are certain gradations on this. And while the person has been working, say, for a required period of time, this so-called C1 level, which is very high, is not expected to be. One could even manage with the A2 somehow to get the permanent residence permit, depending on the situation, because the immigration authorities are looking at the case, at the situation case by case, and if the person, when they can see that the person has been working for a certain period of time, and the language level still is not so heavy, but they anyhow would grant the permanent residence permit on the different basis.
Hello?
Sorry?
No, we can continue. Yeah, there was just microphone unmuted. So I'll mute the microphone back.
Yeah, so that concerns the education story, because, well, once again, I just wanted to stress it out that, well, the study itself doesn't give the possibility to apply for the permanent residence permit. In no cases. One has to have the work history.
Yes, and like the work history requirement that we were talking previously, there are also some other general requirements which apply to all application paths as a basis. So the first condition is the qualification for a continuous A permit basis, and you must meet the requirements for this A permit in order to be granted a permanent residence permit. In other words, you must still have grounds for staying in Finland. In addition, you must keep in mind, you must choose one application path and meet the integration requirements. So you have two requirements to be met: the A permit basis and the integration requirements. For example, work history, language skills, residence in Finland. There are grounds which are mostly familiar to you as holding an A permit. So the basis for the application could be family ties in Finland, having, for example, partner or child in Finland, your employment relationship in Finland, or if you're an entrepreneur or specialist in Finland. And here it comes interesting, because job seeking or starting a business is especially relevant for those of you who have completed higher education degree in Finland. So you have the possibility to apply for a permanent residence permit on a basis of job seeking if you also apply for a permanent residence permit on the application path higher education degree completed in Finland. There are some requirements for the job seeking. For example, you have to have had the permanent permit for studies previously, and you have now completed the degree in Finland, but you haven't yet found a job, and you have sufficient funds for living in Finland. By sufficient funds, I mean 800 euros per month at your disposal. There is one exception. So if you already have been granted a 2-year continuous residence permit on the basis of job seeking or starting a business, you cannot be granted a permanent residence permit on the same grounds. So when you are considering applying for a continuous residence permit, but fixed term, or if you apply for a permanent residence permit, it's worth to consider which ground are you taking to the application. So if it's job seeking or another ground. And then there are also others such as international protection or Finnish origin, difficult personal circumstances, case by case. But to summarize, for students, you cannot apply for a permanent residence permit only on the basis of studies. You have to have the higher education degree completed in Finland and will meet the related requirements to that application path, and you have to fulfill the job seeking requirements. When you apply for the permit, you must also show economic self-reliance, meaning that you have enough money at your disposal to live in Finland. There are different income thresholds for different residence permits. The income requirement depends on the grounds for your continuous residence permit based on your application. So if you, for example, have the employment as a ground, your income threshold would be 1,600 euros. And you must additionally, the salary must be in accordance with the applicable collective bargaining agreement. If you're a specialist or you have an EU blue card, the income requirement is higher, as this is usually a fast track. For example, if you're having urgent working case in Finland and you need urgently the residence permit here, and you're applying for fixed term residence permit, then you must meet this requirement. So it's 3,937 euros. For other kind of grounds, usually the monthly net income threshold is 1,210 euros. But this is also location based. So if you're located in Helsinki, Espoo or Vantaa area, this is the income threshold. If you're, for example, from Oulu, the threshold would be 1,090 euros. And if you're from other municipalities like
Lappeenranta, for example.
Yeah, then it would be even lower. So this depends on your location.
And just to add to your perspective, we're talking here about gross figures. So this is not net. It's net in the family ties and family members. Those are net. And if we're talking about the gross salaries, those are of course gross. And if we're talking about like the first fast track path, like 40,000 is not net. It's a gross income that you should receive annually. Is it correct?
Yes. And also considering capital income. So capital and your salary income together.
Okay, yes. And for the family members, of course, like these are the income requirements in net. They are the same basically for everyone who is applying for the residence permits. And they are for the main applicant, for the second family members, and for the kids, they're slightly lower than that, but they're still here. Mm-hmm. It's something like 480 for the kids, for the second kids, and then 360 for the third and ongoing.
Yes. And there are some exceptions to the financial requirements if you need special protection or you are a relative of a Finnish national or Finnish citizen. So then you don't need to meet these income thresholds. The tolerance also to criminality is pretty strict. So unconditional prison sentence breaks the continuous residence period. Just to note, regarding, for example, the application path 1, the 6 years requirement. So it restarts after the sentence is fully served. This was one of the new changes, that it was even more tight, the requirement regarding the criminality.
What about speeding tickets? If I got a speeding ticket, does it count as a kind of criminal activity or a misbehavior from the migration authorities' view or not?
It depends on the overspeeding.
Okay, so
No. In fact,
Okay.
everything, it really depends, because if you got on the radar, well, that is one stuff. When you get the ticket, which is like 120, 180 euros, it is not counted at all. But if you get the ticket, depending on the stopped by the police, stop somewhere on the road for overspeeding, and get the fine, depending on your salary income, then it could.
Okay. Good to know. And don't speed. Don't drive fast. You still have to get the permanent residence permit and citizenship.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so yes, and other general requirements, valid passport, travel document, and not posing a danger to public order or security. These are also to be considered. Okay, so now we have walked through the 5 application paths, and to bring everything together, I have made this beautiful chart which shows you that what each path requires in terms of time spent in Finland. So here you can see the work history requirement and the language skills requirement. So it varies from 2 to 3 years and A2 to B C1 level, and also other requirements which are for all of them to be met. And I also have here the EU long-term residence permit, just that you remember this option too. So feel free to take screenshot of it if you want. But we still have one more important topic left, which is family ties and related permanent residence permits. So could you, Igor, tell us a bit more about these kinds of situations? Igor, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm not now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Well, first of all, I have noted that there were several questions regarding the family ties and what is considered to be the family, or who is considered to be the family member. And that should be put on the desk pretty clearly, that the family member includes the spouse or registered partner, minor children, cohabiting partner in certain conditions, and the parent of a child who is living in Finland. So basically, I've noticed it went through the line, the question whether the non-registered family member could be considered as one. Yes, if you're living together, if it is registered in the population register of Finland that you're living together, as a spouse, it's fine. It is calculated like this. However, one should understand that the application for the family member is to obtain the permanent residence permit is not automatic, even though the family member to whom you came or whom you're living with has a permanent residence permit. It does not mean that you get the residence permit automatically. In most cases, one could apply, but the precondition of living for a certain period of time, as Josefina has mentioned it already, should be faced. Otherwise, unfortunately, it doesn't work. The residence permit for the family ties, with the main requirements would be like when the sponsor, so-called, is living in Finland, and the one has to prove the Geneva family relationship. Fine, and there should be kind of official document confirming the relationship with the family member. We have, for example, the pending case where the lady is not officially married to the guy, but they have been living with the man for 7 or 8 years. So she's considered to be the family member, and she's getting the continuation of residence permit on this basis. She is capable and eager, well, if she is eager to apply for the permanent residence permit only on this basis, even though their partnership is not officially registered as with the, or confirmed with the marriage certificate. So basically, this is the case. As you have mentioned, Ilya, one of the this is also very important to remember the family income, because we are having we have had just recently the case where it is not applied to the permanent residence permit, but somehow for the first residence permit, where the father of family of 3 children is living permanently in Finland and has a permanent residence permit, but his income is not enough big to get his family the residence permit intact. So there are 5 family members, and his income was close to 30,000, and Immigration Service denied his the application of the family. They didn't get the possibility to get into Finland, even though the guy is living here for 6 years already. So one has to think about it all the time, and taking the consideration that the income is also very crucial.
And regarding the kids, if they turn 18, can they apply still together if they are dependent on?
Unfortunately not. And here, Finland differs a lot from other European countries, where 18 years old child is not considered anymore to be the family member, with certain exceptions. It certainly will be.
But for example, if a child's still dependent on a parent,
dependent. If the child dependent on the family only on the sick problems or health problems, this is one story. No other alternative is coming up, unfortunately.
Okay, so otherwise, like if
then one should find the other grounds to get the child in here.
Oh, all right. So in this case, basically, the child will be granted a continuous 4-year permit for until the parent gets the citizenship, or in this case, even not, because the child is more than 18 years old.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, the easiest way, we know that, in the citizenship law, when it comes to the citizenship, it's very easy to apply for the citizenship for the guys who are between 18 and 22, and the process itself is much faster than for the others. if the person is living already in Finland or have been living in Finland for a certain period of time. Because usually, if you look at the migrant side, the line for the citizenship, for example, nowadays is 34 months, but for the youngster guys until 22, they could get the citizenship within 8-9 months. And
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then, like, if a child turns 18 during the application period, this is still qualifies. So, like, if it's under 18, if they're under 18 when I apply.
At the date of applying.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So I think that we can move forward. We don't have too much time. About 20 minutes left for this session. So let's move on. And what do we have? Do we have a Q&A session coming up? Correct.